Ritesh. Hey, congratulations on your new film, The Red Mask.
Thank you so much. Excited to show it to the world.
More of a congratulations being showcased at Frightfest in the UK. I mean, how do you feel about that?
That was honestly, I'm kind of blown away because we sent it to Fright. This is my first feature. Never done a feature before. And so I come from the doc world, and it's funny in documentary, you do it a lot for the love of doing, of making something and telling a story. And in this case, this is the first film festival we applied to. We got in, and they put us on the main stage. And we found out the other day that we're in the main stage, 800 person, 790 seats to be exact. We are sold out, and I'm even more blown away. So to be at Fright Fest is absolutely incredible, where amazing movies have launched in the past, and a fan base that I've already just got. I just came from the main Fright Fest area, and just the fans are absolutely rabid about.
Well, you certainly set a high bar for yourself, but tell us, Ritesh, how did this project came about with you?
So it's a great story because, when the pandemic happened in 2020, I, like so many people before me, were just sort of like, the world kind of stopped. You're like, well, what do I do right now? And, my background is that I started out as a journalist and then went into music documentary, and I worked for MTV back in the days when the M actually still stood for music. And I was in their news and docs department, and that was kind of my film school. And I'd always done documentary, long form documentary, unscripted television, then got into advertising, but my heart always wanted to tell feature fiction stories. And when the pandemic happened, I was like, this feels like a good time to read some scripts and meet some producers. So I was in New York City, and I got connected to this producer named Deetz, and I was kind of doing like the New York City version of the water bottle tour, safe distance, 6 feet apart during in July of 2020. And what was started as a 30-minute coffee meeting turned into a 3 hour, really just connected with him. And he said, hey, I've got this script that's looking for a first time director. Would you be interested in reading it? And it was called The Red Mask. And I read it that night. And I remember from like the first act and right off the bat, literally was lying down on my couch, and it made me sit up. Um, and I will say, whenever I first read something or hear a pitch, hear an idea, I'm like, what's sticky? And this movie just really stuck to me. This script just stuck to me. And it started, in 2020, 4 years later, in October 2024, we were shooting in LA, and now here we are at Fright Fest.
You know what's wonderful about these type of horror movies, especially here with the Red Mask, is it's very, very meta. You're trying to craft a
Very meta.
horror movie that is trying to be unique and not you know
Mhm.
follow the same type of formulas in the past. So, how did you want
Right.
to approach that, or did you want to play with the tropes?
That's a great question. It's because it was so meta already, right? The film was very self-aware. The writers, Patrick and Samantha, they did an incredible job writing such rich material, and they are both horror genre encyclopedia. They are top to bottom. They know it all. They've seen it all. And so we really kind of talked about that being in the DNA. And one thing for me that really stood out about this movie was the promise of the premise is that almost everything's been done in the genre. That our writer Allina wanted to sort of do something that no one has ever seen before. I said, okay, if that's what she's trying to do, that's what we need to try to do. And so for me as a director, it really meant, how do I take this script and kind of give the audience the unexpected? What aren't they going to see coming? So I sat down and I kind of created a set of rules for myself and a lens in which to judge every choice, every decision, every character, scene, sequence, beat, ending, everything. It had to be, how do we twist the story? How does you think it's going to go right and we go left? And so that became a defining principle to be very meta. And I was like, for me, Gig, I always try to say, like, if I was the audience member, what would be satisfying? Like when I get to the end, like, what am I going to be like? That was sticky for them, just like it was sticky for me on the first read. And so I just wanted to be very unexpected. And I also thought, the same way that we are trying not to fall in the tropes of what's been done in the past, I kind of felt like this was three mini movies in one. On one hand, it was there's this love story between two people who are just struggling with the idea of identity. Um, and they really love each other, but this toxic online world is sort of pushing them apart. So that was one part. On the second, there was this horror slasher kind of mix within this movie, playing with that meta idea with fans and this toxic online toxicity amongst the fans that there can be in the extremes. And then on the third, it was just a good old fashioned revenge movie in the end. And I won't ruin that for the audience. I want them to see it for themselves. But that's sort of how I approach the movie.
We always like that the revenge part, especially on the guessing game because of the final girl status. But it is one remarkable film because it is a social commentary about the toxicity and
Mm.
the fandom that we have today. And
Hmm.
already you already set a high bar for yourself. Are you a little bit nervous about that?
It's funny. You tell me. You're one of the first people that have actually seen the movie, and I'm excited because tomorrow 800 people are going to watch it, and I'm going to get a much wider feedback. But you saw it, so you tell me. I'm like, I think it's a high bar from a standpoint of, the film. Every day I left set gig. We didn't do this with we didn't have a lot of budget, but I think if you watch the movie and what I'm excited for fans, they wouldn't know that. But I always say this: budget doesn't mean you've got to compromise something. It just means sometimes you got to roll up your sleeves and work a little harder and figure something out. And every day we left set, I like literally to myself as I'm driving back, half so tired from like shooting nothing but night scenes. And I'm thinking, how are we making it look this good? So we had incredibly talented people on board. Every down from our director of photography, Powell Robinson, who does a lot of horror, to Mitch Paulson, our colorist, who works with Roger Deakins, Dennis Villeneuve, who colored the film. I mean, there is incredible artists who brought their talent and really elevated, the ideas we had, and maximize that budget to like set the bar. In my mind, they set the bar very high. All I did was kind of be the composer bringing all the pieces together.
The thing about making a horror film like this, whether you're trying to be unique or not, there's always those certain rules of horror
Mm.
that you have to
Mhm.
abide by. It's very similar to that they addressed in Scream itself.
Mm.
But could you talk about the certain aspects you have to include into this film? Because I know you basically name dropped quite a few films that fans adore.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that was so fun in the script that they wrote in there. It was just so seamless, right? That it was so meta. Some of the films that were inspirations for this movie, obviously Funny Games, obviously Scream. Um, and this we The Strangers became certainly a vibe. And then down to there was a movie that maybe a little bit more unexpected, but for me has always stood out. I think it's one of David Fincher's greatest movies, The Game, where is this a game or is this real? And so that became like a key guiding principle. But like looking at those rules and like thinking about them, what I kind of created is once I had the script, I ripped it apart and then I took every one of those rules from horror and every rule that was in this game. And I asked myself the question and I judged the decisions I made and the choices of how we executed through one lens. How do we take this rule and how do we subvert it so that if it comes back in the end and it's a callback, how do we flip what you would expect the rule would go and we go the opposite? And again, it was that idea of like the more I could subvert the expectations and subvert sort of like what the audience already innately knows about a rule, the more personally rewarding it would be. At least that's the bet I made for the audience when we paid it off.
Now, of course, the villain has to be the Red Mask itself. Tell us about that journey of trying to finalize that Red Mask.
It's funny, actually. You mean this one sitting right here, right next to me,
That's
right
right.
there? So it was so interesting, like creating, there's in a great way that, this movie's four principal actors, but there's a fifth and a sixth. And the fifth, I would say, is obviously the Red Mask. And the sixth was the house. The house was so important. And I got a great story for you about the house that remind me to tell you. But in terms of this mask, when I read this script and I thought about the mask and I thought about what it meant, like gig in maybe this is the doc person in me, but I just think as somebody who grew up in this country with parents that immigrated from India and grew up in very Indian house, but born and raised in the Midwest, which was, at times white as the driven snow. Identity's always been something I struggled with. What's my place in this world? Am I Indian or am I American? Like, what am I? I'm not sure. And so I found that in my past work that I've done, identity was always a theme that I was just gravitated to in stories. And in the case of the Red Mask, for me, what was so interesting is on one hand, there was also an idea that I played with. It's like when it comes to the, online fandom and just this diehard, occasionally toxic version of it, whatever extreme you're on, you almost get to this place with the internet and social media where who needs a guy in a mask when there's nothing scarier than this online anonymity? And to me, I really started looking at masks and all the masks we wear and what happens when you put two people, lock them in a house with who have two different ideals, and you actually take the mask off and each side takes their mask off. What happens? And it was down to that simple question. And so when it comes to the mask, like crafting this mask, interestingly, we gave it this shape, this teardrop, where it's like a crack from Karina as if it happened in the original, which obviously one of the best parts about doing this movie is we got to create a lore that didn't exist, right? I created an entire 10-page backstory on the mask and like what the original 1982 slasher was, what happened, and I gave it to all my HODs. But, Jenna Tooley, our incredible production designer, when I gave her the backstory, she created this. And like when we saw this little teardrop, it was almost as if like a character in pain, but also this crack that Karina, the original final girl, would have given him. So it was fun to play with that idea and really kind of shape the character's world and what it looked like, what it felt like, how he moved, all that.
And don't forget to talk about the sixth character, the cabin in the woods.
The cabin in the woods, a fun little fact about that. This is the best part. These are the happy accidents that happen when you're challenged when you don't have the biggest budget. We decided to film this in Los Angeles. We survived a pandemic, many work stoppages, and then finally there was a window last year where we looked at doing this movie in states around the country that offered tax credits, but instead, like we saw a community in California and our friends who things weren't back on their feet right away last summer and last fall. So we said, you know what? At the budget level we're at, we can't get a tax credit from California, but let's go film there anyways because let's film it inside Los Angeles and inside the zone. There's only one problem. This movie is very much a cabin in the woods, like a cabin in the woods. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how are we going to find a cabin in the woods in Los Angeles? We don't have a budget. We don't have enough money for a scout. So I got sent some links and the house just really wasn't landing. There's palm trees outside. So I said, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to kind of go into my doc routes where you're just like are left to fend for yourself. When I cut my teeth at MTV News and Docs back in the day, I was basically given a camera, an idea, and told to figure it out. And so one Saturday I went down like an 8-hour Google rabbit hole and just looking at like houses that had been used in Los Angeles for horror films. And I think in hour 6, I found the house from Friday the 13th in 1984. And the original house they shot, one of the Friday the 13th Part 4, is the house that we used for the Red Mask. So when fans see that house, they're going to think, especially horror fans, they're going to be like, I've seen that house before. I know that house. And it was the same house. And I saw the house on the pictures and I was drawn to the house. And the house became an incredible sixth character in this cabin that you would never know was in Los Angeles.
That is a terrific story. I am very glad that all the pieces came together for you, especially for here for the Red Mass. But I had taken a lot of your time, but I want to leave with one last thought.
Sure. Yes,
And
please.
especially the fact that this has always been a debate, not just amongst the fandom, but it's also amongst horror directors, is the idea between practical and CGI. And you used
Mm,
both in this
mhm.
film. So could you talk about that debate and how much of a debate did you have with yourself on this?
I had a lot. I mean, in an ideal world, we tried to, as much as possible, be a modern day slasher. And that meant, like they would have done back in the early 80s, shoot all practically, right? There's one problem. We had just enough money to shoot 16 days of principal photography. The benefit was we were in one house with four main actors. The bad news is we had the budget we had. And so Apple, our special effects makeup person, who's a whiz based out of Los Angeles, she's absolutely incredible. Um, and we went through and we looked at like how much practical can we get away with, and it honestly became sort of like a Moneyball situation of like what's the value of how much money do we save and how much time is it going to take to prep each prosthetic or gag versus do we need that time to maybe if we do that, do we lose a scene over here? So we had a nice mix. What I think ended up coming down to a nice blend um, of a mix of practical versus CGI. And obviously, even like the effects people, as great as they are, and we worked with the Artery and Matt Gardocki, and the Artery are incredible. They do The Smile, they did Midsommar, they do like every big horror film, and even they're like the number one rule of CGI is don't use CGI. And I'm like, but what if we don't? What if we don't have the time to? So it became a split, but I think they did a phenomenal job. It blends so well, and I think like that's one of the things I'm most proud about when I saw the final film. I'm like, I don't think it doesn't look fake. It doesn't look like CGI.
You know what? You've done a terrific job. It's a green check mark in my book, but
I
the
love it.
audiences this weekend is going to be the final judge for yourself. So, Ritesh, congratulations
I
on the Red
appreciate
Mask.
it, Gig. What did you think? I'm dying to hear what you're the first person I've talked to that saw the final film that wasn't involved with the film. I'm dying to hear what you thought of the film.
You know what? I love the fact that it was one of those films that actually, it's a social commentary of what I cover a lot of horror films, and there's
Hmm.
always these rules of horror. I already covered a few films this Fright Fest, and some of them are
Hmm.
good, some of them are mixed. And I want to say, as your directorial debut, I'm actually thoroughly impressed of what you actually
Mm.
had to do. But it was more engaging with the characters, and I do have to admit, I did not see the twist coming on the third act, and that's
Mm.
because basically you expect one thing, and then all of a sudden it just became something else entirely, and that's what horror fans actually want.
I love hearing that, Gig. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your POV. I know I put you on the spot there. But thank you for telling me what you thought, and I just hope horror fans see it and embrace it, and I hope we just gave them something that made them think, made them feel, and entertained them. And at the end, I'll be happy with that.
You know what? I'm happy, and they're going to be happy this weekend. I'm certain of it. Ritesh, thank you very much for carrying this conversation with us about the Red Mask. Hopefully, it becomes much more than that.
Fingers crossed. Great
Thank
meeting you,
you.
Gig.